So when I joined the Android team back in 2006, it was about 20 people in a small corner of the Google campus. And we were developing, we had a basic operating system running on a very small BlackBerry-like device, no touchscreen. We were developing a platform and a product at the same time. And we wanted that platform to support a huge range of different hardware configurations that we hadn't even imagined. And to do that, one of the best ways to do that was to develop several products on that platform. So shortly after I joined the team, we added a new piece of hardware, which was the G1, which was very different from the original device we were supporting. And the idea was to implement support for both platforms, and then we would be able to support all of the platforms in between. But then the iPhone came out, and we decided we needed to focus a little bit, so we just focused our efforts down on the G1. But we were also thinking about tablets at this time and TVs, and so we had all of that in mind. So with any project, you always have to balance the number of features versus the amount of time you spend on polish versus how quickly you release. And in this particular case, focusing on the G1, we were basically trading off some features so that we could spend more time polishing that product and release a little sooner. You could write an entire book about where the successful point is on this spectrum. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm just going to talk about 10 features that came out of our decisions on Android. And to kind of spice things up a little bit, all 10 of these features are Android 1.0 features. Little change of pace from this conference. The first one that I thought was really cool and special was this idea of having always-on GTalk. From day one in your Android device, it's had an open Jabber connection to the server that runs in the background, and it wakes your device up anytime you get a message. And this was a great alternative to paying like 30 cents a piece for text messages. Also, over that same Jabber connection, Android has always supported contact sync. Anytime you update one of your Gmail contacts, it pushes to your Android device. And how many people have remember what it was like to transfer your contacts via a SIM card? It was a real pain. And for somebody who carries multiple phones and switches phones all the time, just having my contacts there immediately available right after I log in using my Gmail account was a huge win. Also, Gmail and calendars gets pushed over that same Jabber connection. Another really cool feature that was in Android 1.0 was augmented reality. And I remember the first time I saw this, it blew my mind. I'm pretty sure that the app developers were Wikitude, and they actually had it working when only the emulator was out. And the way they did it was we didn't even have camera APIs yet or the accelerometer APIs, but they used the accelerometer and the camera on their MacBook and exposed it via web service, and then their app running in the emulator called it. So basically, they had a laptop running the emulator that you could use as augmented reality. It really just blew my mind. This was in Android 1.0. 2D barcode scanning. This was launched on the G1. It was first on the Android platform. This was it was enabled by a library called Zebra Crossing, which was sponsored by Google, and that same library can now be used on the iPhone. But the main feature of the G1 that enabled this was the autofocus camera. Multitasking. This is where I spent most of my time. I ended up being the Dalvik library lead, and I spent a lot of time on the class preloading and the VMs. And one of the really cool things about Dalvik is how much memory it shares. It like preloads all the classes that are shared by all apps, and then it uses fork to fork off VMs. And all of those VMs can share the same classes. So in this case here, this is my actual device. And as you can see, it's running 25 VMs simultaneously. My device only has 512 megs of RAM. That really blows my mind. And this is what really enabled multitasking on Android from day one. Back then, we only had, I think, like 128 or 256 megs of RAM on the device, and you could still run all these processes and all these background processes. Permissions. This one caught a little bit of flack at the beginning, but this is really what enables the Android platform to expose all of these APIs in a secure way, all these APIs that you can't get on other platforms. And like the common criticism of permissions was that most users don't understand, and they just hit OK and ignore them. And that is absolutely true. But what is also true is that there are some knowledgeable users out there who do understand and take the time to look at those permissions, and then they rate the app. And if you use permissions that you shouldn't, they'll rate the app lower, and then pretty much all users see those ratings. And on Square, we've actually seen this in practice. We added a feature where you could invite your friends to Square, and this required access to your contact list. And actually, users scoffed at needing to give that permission to the Square app and actually started getting us lower ratings, and we ended up removing the feature or implementing it in another way. Over-the-air updates. This one is huge. They're just now adding this in iOS 5, but we've had it in Android in day one. And at the time, this was really a crazy idea that your phone would download an operating system update and update its operating system on the fly. And this was really also a scary proposition, because could you imagine like hundreds of thousands of phones being bricked and then having to come up with an alternate solution? But it's really a huge convenience, and it's it's something that I definitely enjoy, not having to plug up my phone to a computer whenever I'm doing updates. This is one most people don't think about. I remember like an early complaint with Android was there was no way to exit apps, but this was actually a huge feature. It was really cool, and it was something that kind of blew my mind when I first heard about it. It's the idea on Android is that all apps are always running. And Android from day one has had this very sophisticated runtime system and lifecycle that enables this, where even though your process isn't running, your app can persist its state, and then the operating system can bring your process back and restore the app state. So from a user perspective, all your apps should always be running. And this is really cool, and I think this is the way all operating systems are going to end up going, because why should the user care about whether their apps are running or not? And you actually saw this in OS 10 also in the next release. The notification window shade. It's such a simple, it's a simple idea, but nobody had really come up with a solution this clean to it before. And this is actually one of my favorite features. I don't know if you've ever used other devices where you get a pop-up every time an SMS comes in or something like that, and it like interrupts you as you're typing on the keyboard and you accidentally hit the OK button. This is just a really wonderful answer to that. Your phone no longer has to interrupt what you're doing. And it's so good that another recent operating system, or another upcoming operating system, copied it almost verbatim. I think it's pretty funny. The last and final feature that I want to talk about is something that some people haven't really considered, but it's one of the most inspirational and most inspiring features for me, and it was the thing that I really loved about working on the Android project. One of the goals we set early on was that we were going to support people all over the world. And we actually did research. We sent people to India and Africa to see how people use cell phones. And there were lots of cases where you would have 5 people all sharing one cell phone for a small business in a market in India. So one of our explicit goals was that with Android, you would never need a computer. And I think iOS is just now getting there, but Android has been here since day one. And I think this is really what enabled Android's worldwide adoption. And it's what made the Android OS, it's wonderful for me, but it's just as wonderful for like a rickshaw company in India. So, thank you.